The blood-soaked burlap sack clung to her face as she struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, the musty scent of hay and horse manure filling her nostrils through the rough fabric. Penelope Matthews had been certain she would die in this forgotten barn on the outskirts of Redemption Creek, Colorado, until the heavy wooden door creaked open and a man's shadow fell across the dirt floor. It was 1878, a harsh summer even by frontier standards. Drought had scorched the land for months, cattle were dying, and desperation hung in the air like the constant threat of wildfire. Penelope had arrived on the westbound train just 3 days prior, her dreams of teaching at the newly established schoolhouse shattered within hours of her arrival. The man who now stood before her said nothing at first. She could sense him studying her through the sack that covered her head. Her once fine traveling dress was torn at the shoulder, her honey blonde hair matted with sweat and grime. After what seemed an eternity, she heard his footsteps approach. "Miss," his voice came low and cautious, "I ain't gonna hurt you." She flinched when his hands moved to the sack, but instead of further torment, she felt the rough material loosening. In one swift motion, he pulled it from her head. The sudden brightness made her eyes water as she blinked rapidly, trying to focus on her rescuer. He stood tall before her, dust-covered boots and worn denim leading up to a weathered face partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. His eyes, however, caught her attention, immediately clear and blue as a mountain lake, regarding her with a mixture of concern and wariness. "Name's Jackson Reed," he said, kneeling down to work at the ropes binding her wrists. "Most folks call me Jack." When her hands came free, Penelope instinctively rubbed at the raw skin. "Penelope Matthews," she managed, her voice hoarse from screaming and thirst. "How did you find me?" Jack's expression darkened as he offered her a canteen. "Drink slow now." "As for finding you, I was tracking the Blackwell boys. They've been rustling cattle from my ranch. Saw them riding hard from this direction before dawn. Figured I'd check what they were running from." Penelope sipped the water carefully, each swallow painful against her parched throat. "They took everything," she whispered. "My money, my belongings." She trailed off, unable to speak of the other violations they had threatened before leaving her to die. "The Blackwells don't leave witnesses," Jack said, his voice hardening. "They meant for you to die here." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "Can you stand, Miss Matthews?" With his help, Penelope rose to her feet, swaying slightly as blood rushed to her limbs. Jack's strong arm caught her before she could fall. "My horse is outside. I'll take you to town, get you to the doctor." Penelope stiffened. "No," she said quickly. "I can't go back there. The marshal, he's in their pocket. He watched them take me and did nothing." A muscle tightened in Jack's jaw. Figured as much. Shelton never was worth the tin star he wears. He looked down at her, decision forming in his eyes. "My ranch is half a day's ride. You'll be safe there until we figure what's to be done." The journey to Jackson Reed's property was arduous. Penelope rode in front of him on his chestnut gelding, her body aching with each stride of the horse beneath them. She had told him the bare bones of her story, how she'd arrived from Boston to take the teaching position, only to discover the school board member who'd hired her had other intentions. When she'd refused his advances, he'd labeled her a thief and handed her over to the Blackwells. Jack had listened in grim silence, his arm steadying her as they rode. By the time the ranch house came into view, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in violent shades of orange and crimson. "It ain't much," Jack said as they approached the modest 2-story structure, "but it's mine, free and clear." The house stood on a gentle rise, overlooking acres of grazing land. A large barn and several outbuildings formed a loose semicircle behind the main structure. It wasn't grand by any means, but to Penelope's exhausted eyes, it looked like salvation. An older man emerged from the barn as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile that quickly faded when he noticed Penelope. "Jack." "What in tarnation, Hank, this is Miss Matthews," Jack interrupted, dismounting before carefully helping Penelope down. "She's had a rough go of it. The Blackwells." Understanding dawned in Hank's eyes. He nodded once and hurried forward to help support Penelope's other side. "Miss, let's get you inside. My wife Rosa can tend to you." Rosa, a kind-faced Mexican woman in her 50s, took one look at Penelope and sprang into action. She shooed the men from the house and led Penelope to a small bedroom off the kitchen, where she helped her undress and wash. "Those animals," Rosa muttered as she gently cleaned the rope burns on Penelope's wrists. "The Lord will judge them for this." Too exhausted to even cry, Penelope allowed herself to be tended to, dressed in a borrowed nightgown and tucked into bed like a child. As consciousness began to slip away, she heard Rosa's voice from the doorway. "She stays as long as she needs, she." "Yes," came Jack's reply. "She's under my protection now." Penelope awakened to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then memory flooded back. The barn, the Blackwells, the rescue. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. A soft knock at the door preceded Rosa's entrance, bearing a tray with steaming porridge and coffee. "You slept through the night and half the morning," Rosa said, setting the tray across Penelope's lap. "Good, your body needs rest to heal." "Thank you," Penelope said, suddenly aware of her ravenous hunger. "You and Mr. Reed have been very kind." Rosa smiled. "Jack is a good man." Too long alone since his brother died, but a good man. She moved toward the window, drawing the curtains wider. "He has gone to town, will return by nightfall." Penelope nearly choked on her coffee. "Town, but the Blackwells, do not worry. Jack knows how to handle himself. He is speaking with Judge Porter, who is not in the Blackwells' pocket." Rosa's expression grew serious. "He is also bringing your belongings from the hotel if they are still there." After breakfast, Rosa helped Penelope into a simple dress that had belonged to Jack's late sister-in-law. It was a bit loose in the bodice, but otherwise fit well enough. Despite Rosa's protests that she should rest more, Penelope insisted on helping with household chores, desperate for any activity to keep her mind from dwelling on recent events. By mid-afternoon, they had baked bread, churned butter, and were hanging laundry in the yard when Hank called out from the corral. "Riders coming." Penelope's heart lurched until Rosa squeezed her arm. "It is Jack. I recognize Thunder's gait." Indeed, Jack rode at the head of a small party, 3 men besides himself, all mounted on dusty horses. Behind them came a wagon driven by a young man. Jack dismounted and approached Penelope, his expression unreadable beneath his hat. "Miss Matthews, you're looking better today." "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she replied, suddenly conscious of her borrowed clothes and loose hair. "This here is Judge Porter." Jack indicated a distinguished older man with a silver beard who tipped his hat to her. "And these are Deputies Miller and Thornton from Silver Creek. They'd like to hear your account of what happened, if you're up to it." Judge Porter stepped forward. "Miss Matthews, I apologize for what you've endured in our territory. I assure you the law still means something to some of us out here." Inside the house, Penelope recounted her ordeal to the judge and deputies. They listened without interruption, though she noticed Jack's knuckles whitening as he gripped his hat during certain parts of her story. "The Blackwells have been a cancer in this region for too long," Judge Porter said when she finished. "With your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, we can finally bring them to justice." He cleared his throat. "However, there is the matter of your safety until then." "She stays here," Jack said firmly, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the house. "My ranch is remote enough and we keep it well defended." The judge nodded. "I thought you might say that. Very well. Deputies Miller and Thornton will remain in the area, patrolling between here and town." He turned to Penelope. "The young man outside has brought your trunk from the hotel. The landlady had hidden it away when the Blackwells came looking for it." Tears of relief sprang to Penelope's eyes. Her few precious possessions, the photographs of her parents, her books, she had thought them lost forever. As the judge and deputies prepared to leave, Jack walked them to their horses. Penelope watched from the porch as they conversed in low tones, the men occasionally glancing back toward the house. Finally, they mounted up and rode away, leaving only the wagon with her trunk. Jack approached her, removing his hat. "They'll be moving against the Blackwells soon, but not before they're certain they can round up the whole gang. Until then," he hesitated. "Until then, I impose upon your hospitality," Penelope finished for him. "Mr. Reed, I don't know how to thank you." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Jack, call me Jack, and there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Penelope said quietly. They wouldn't have. That evening, after her trunk had been brought inside and she had changed into her own clothes, Penelope joined the household for dinner. Besides Jack, Rosa, and Hank, there were two cowboys who worked the ranch, a jovial man named Patrick and a quiet Swede called Anders. The conversation flowed easily around her, tales of cattle, weather, and local gossip creating a sense of normalcy that felt almost surreal after her ordeal. Jack spoke little, but she often caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. After dinner, as Rosa and Penelope cleared the dishes, Jack approached her somewhat awkwardly. "There's something I need to show you," he said, "if you're not too tired." Curious, Penelope followed him outside. The evening was warm, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. Jack led her to a small, fenced garden beside the house. "My mother started this," he explained, "before she passed. Rosa keeps it going now." The garden was a riot of color wildflowers, herbs and vegetables growing together in cheerful abundance, so at odds with the harsh landscape surrounding the ranch. "It's beautiful," Penelope said softly. "I thought." Jack cleared his throat. "Well, Rosa mentioned you were a teacher. Thought maybe you'd like somewhere quiet to read or such while you're here." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Penelope deeply. "Thank you, I would indeed." Jack nodded, seeming relieved. They stood in companionable silence for a moment until he spoke again. Judge Porter brought news. "The school board's looking for another teacher. The man who hired you, Wilson, has been forced to resign after what he did." Penelope's breath caught. "I see. They'd still have you if you wanted, once this business with the Blackwells is settled." Jack wasn't looking at her now, but out toward the distant mountains. "You'd be good at it, I expect. Teaching, I mean." "Perhaps," Penelope said, suddenly uncertain. The idea of returning to town, walking those streets again, filled her with dread. But that's a decision for another day. Jack seemed about to say more, but instead nodded again. "Well, good night, Miss Matthews." "Penelope," she corrected gently. "If I'm to call you Jack, then you must call me Penelope." In the soft evening light, she could have sworn she saw him blush beneath his tan. "Penelope, then, good night." Days at the Reed Ranch settled into a rhythm. Penelope, determined not to be idle, helped Rosa with household tasks and began organizing Jack's modest collection of books, which had sat neglected on shelves since his brother's death. She discovered volumes of poetry, history, and adventure stories, many with passages underlined and notes in the margins. "Edward loved to read," Jack explained when he found her examining a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. "Used to read aloud to me when we were boys. Pa thought it was a waste of time, but Ma encouraged it." "And you?" Penelope asked. "Do you enjoy reading?" Jack shrugged. "Never had much time for it after Ed died. Ranch takes all my attention." Yet she noticed him watching her with interest when she read in the garden, and one evening he asked what story she was so engrossed in. When she explained it was a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, he'd looked embarrassed. "Never could make heads or tails of Shakespeare myself. Too fancy by half." "Perhaps you just need to hear it read properly," Penelope suggested. Before she could second-guess herself, she began to read Sonnet 29 aloud. "When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state." As she read, she was acutely aware of Jack listening intently, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, a silence fell between them that wasn't uncomfortable but charged with something she couldn't name. "That's about feeling lonely and then remembering someone who loves you, isn't it?" he finally said. Surprised and pleased by his insight, Penelope nodded. "Yes, exactly. Despite all his troubles, thinking of his beloved makes him feel richer than kings." Jack considered this. "Reckon I understand Shakespeare better than I thought." The connection that formed between them that evening grew stronger in the days that followed. Jack began joining her in the garden after supper, sometimes bringing his own work ledgers or correspondence, but often just sitting with her as she read. Occasionally, she would read passages aloud and they would discuss them, Jack's observations revealing a keen intelligence beneath his taciturn exterior. A week into her stay, Jack brought news from town. "Judge Porter's men have arrested 2 of the Blackwell gang," he told her over breakfast. "But the brothers themselves are still at large." Penelope felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. Do they know I'm here? Jack's expression darkened. Can't say for certain. Town's full of gossip, but most folks think you've gone back east. He hesitated. Might be wise for you to stay close to the house for now, and never alone. That afternoon, Jack took her on a tour of the ranch. They rode double on Thunder, Jack's strong presence at her back both reassuring and increasingly distracting. He showed her the creek that provided water for the cattle, the high meadow where wildflowers grew in profusion, and the stand of cottonwoods that his father had planted when they first settled the land. Pa came out here in '52 before Colorado was even a territory, Jack explained as they dismounted to rest in the shade of the trees. He and Ma, with Ed just a baby and me not yet born, built everything from nothing. You must be very proud of what they accomplished, Penelope said, admiring the view of the ranch buildings nestled in the valley below. I am, Jack agreed, though sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by their legacy. Pa ran twice as many cattle as I do now. Times change, Penelope observed. From what I've seen, you run this ranch with care and wisdom. That seems more important than simply the number of cattle. Jack looked at her with surprise, as if not accustomed to such direct praise. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's truth, Penelope insisted. Emboldened, she added, You're a good man, Jack Reed. I've not known many in my life, but I recognize one when I see him. A flush crept up Jack's neck, and he looked away. You've had a rough go of it, that's all. Makes an ordinary man seem better than he is. Is that what you think? Penelope asked softly. That my gratitude is clouding my judgment. When Jack met her eyes again, the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I think you're the strongest woman I've ever met, Penelope Matthews, and I think any man would be a fool not to recognize that. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Thunder nickered impatiently, breaking the spell. We should head back, Jack said, rising and offering his hand to help her up. Rosa will have dinner waiting. As they rode back to the ranch, Penelope was acutely aware of Jack's arm around her waist, holding her securely as Thunder navigated the uneven terrain. She wondered what life might have been like if she had come to Redemption Creek under different circumstances, not as a victim seeking refuge, but as a woman free to follow her heart. The peaceful routine of ranch life was shattered 2 days later when Anders rode in at a gallop, his horse lathered and sides heaving. Jack, he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. Blackwell's. They hit the Mendoza place, burned it to the ground. Jack was instantly alert, striding from the barn to meet the cowboy. Casualties. Old man Mendoza's hurt bad, his wife too, the rest got away. Anders gulped for breath. They're saying it's a message. They're coming for anyone who testified against them or helped the law. Jack's eyes found Penelope, who had come onto the porch at the commotion. His expression hardened into resolve. Hank, get the rifles, he ordered. Patrick, ride to the north pasture and bring the men back. Anders, once you've watered that horse, head to Silver Creek. Tell Deputy Miller what's happened. As the men rushed to comply, Jack approached Penelope. I need you to stay inside with Rosa. Keep away from the windows. Fear clutched at her heart. Jack, if they're coming because of me, this isn't your fault, he interrupted firmly. The Blackwells have been terrorizing this county for years. It was always going to end like this. He hesitated, then took her hand. But I won't let them hurt you, I promise you that. The sincerity in his voice steadied her. She squeezed his hand. Be careful, please. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flashed in his eyes. Then he nodded once and released her hand, turning to help Hank distribute weapons to the ranch hands who were gathering in the yard. Inside, Rosa was calmly loading a shotgun. My husband fought Comancheros before we came here, she explained, seeing Penelope's surprise. He taught me well. The women took up positions in the house, Rosa in the kitchen with its view of the approach from town, Penelope in the front room watching the road from the north. Jack and his men had established a perimeter around the ranch buildings, using the natural features of the land for cover. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. As dusk approached, Penelope's nerves were stretched to breaking. Then she heard hoofbeats, approaching fast from the direction of town. Rosa, she called, but the older woman was already moving to her side. One rider, Rosa observed, peering through the gathering gloom. Too small for a Blackwell. Indeed, as the rider came into view, Penelope recognized the young man who had delivered her trunk. He was riding hell-bent, frequently looking over his shoulder. Jack emerged from his position by the corral, rifle ready but not aimed. The young man reined in his horse sharply. "Mr. Reed." He gasped. "They're coming, the Blackwells and their whole gang. They rode through town shooting up everything, said they were coming for the girl and anyone harboring her." Jack's face gave away nothing. "How many?" "8, maybe 10, all armed to the teeth." The young man was trembling. "Judge Porter sent me to warn you. He's gathering men, but they won't get here in time." Jack nodded grimly. "You did good, boy. Now get inside with the women." As the young man, Jimmy, he introduced himself, joined them in the house, Penelope felt a strange calm settle over her. The waiting was over. Whatever happened next, at least the uncertainty was gone. Rosa positioned Jimmy at her rear window with a rifle. "You know how to use this?" "Yes, madam," he replied, looking somewhat steadier. "My pa taught me." Night had fallen completely when they heard the first distant whoops and hollers. The Blackwells weren't attempting stealth. They wanted their victims to know they were coming, to feel the fear build with each passing minute. From her position, Penelope could see Jack conferring with Hank, their expressions grim in the moonlight. The ranch hands had spread out, using the outbuildings and corral fences for cover. She counted 7 defenders against what might be 10 attackers, not good odds. The riders appeared as dark shapes against the starlit landscape, approaching at a steady pace now, spreading out to surround the ranch. A shot rang out, one of the Blackwells firing into the air, followed by a harsh laugh. "Reed," a voice bellowed. "Send out the girl and we'll let the rest of you live." Jack's answer was a single rifle shot that knocked a man from his saddle. Instantly, the night erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning, the crack of rifles punctuated by men's shouts and the terrified whinnying of horses. Through it all, Penelope maintained her position at the window, Rosa's shotgun heavy in her hands. She had never fired a gun before, but Rosa had given her brief instructions. "Wait until they're close," the older woman had advised. "You cannot miss then." The battle seemed to go on forever, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. At one point, 2 riders broke through the defensive line and charged toward the house. Rosa's shotgun boomed beside Penelope, catching one man in the shoulder and sending him tumbling from his horse. Penelope aimed at the second rider, her hands shaking so badly she feared she would drop the gun. But before she could pull the trigger, Jack appeared from the shadows and dragged the man from his saddle. The 2 men grappled in the dirt, trading punches. Even in the poor light, Penelope could see this was one of the Blackwell brothers, the younger one, Samuel, who had put the sack over her head. Jack landed a solid blow that sent Blackwell reeling, but the outlaw recovered quickly, drawing a knife from his boot. Without thinking, Penelope threw open the door and rushed onto the porch. "Jack, he has a knife," her warning came just in time. Jack dodged the slash meant for his throat, catching Blackwell's wrist and twisting until the knife fell. With a roar of effort, Jack slammed his fist into Blackwell's jaw, once, twice, 3 times until the man collapsed unconscious. Jack looked up at Penelope, his face a mask of sweat and dirt in the moonlight. "Get back inside," he shouted, but his warning came too late. From the corner of her eye, Penelope saw movement the other wounded rider Rosa had shot, raising a pistol with his good arm. She opened her mouth to scream a warning, but the sound was drowned out by the crash of a rifle shot. The wounded man jerked and fell still. Behind him stood Hank, rifle still smoking. "All clear, Jack," he called. "The rest are running or down." In the aftermath, they counted 3 dead attackers, including Amos Blackwell, the elder brother. 2 more, including Samuel, were wounded and bound. The remaining gang members had fled when the tide turned against them. Jack had taken a bullet graze across his ribs, and Patrick had a more serious wound in his thigh, but miraculously, no one on the ranch had been killed. Rosa tended to the injuries while Hank and Anders secured the prisoners in the root cellar. Judge Porter and a posse from Silver Creek arrived just before dawn, having ridden through the night when they heard of the Blackwells' plans. They took custody of the prisoners and the bodies, promising that justice would be swift and final this time. As the sun rose over the battered ranch, Penelope found Jack sitting alone on the porch steps, his side freshly bandaged. She sat beside him, offering a cup of coffee, which he accepted with a nod of thanks. "It's over," she said softly. Jack stared into his coffee. "For now." "There might be others. The Blackwells had friends." "I should leave," Penelope said, the words painful but necessary. "My presence puts you all in danger." Jack's head snapped up, his eyes fierce. No, the vehemence in that single word startled her. "Jack, be reasonable. Last night could have ended very differently. You could have died, all of you, because of me." "Not because of you," Jack corrected. "Because of men who think they can take whatever they want without consequence." He set his coffee down and turned to face her fully. "Penelope, I don't want you to go. Not unless it's what you truly want." Her heart stuttered at the intensity in his gaze. "What are you saying?" Jack took a deep breath. "I'm saying this ranch has felt more like a home these past 2 weeks than it has since Edward died. I'm saying that when I saw that man aiming at you last night, I realized I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." He paused, gathering his courage. "I'm saying I care for you, Penelope, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. "Oh, Jack. I know it's too soon," he hurried on. "You've been through hell, and the last thing you need is some rough cowboy declaring himself, but I wanted you to know before you made any decisions about leaving." Penelope reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "It is soon," she agreed. "For both of us, but I care for you too, Jack, very much." The hope that dawned in his eyes was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then stay," he said simply. "Not as a guest or someone under my protection. Stay as, well, as whatever you want to be, teacher in town if that's your dream." "Or," he faltered, "or," Penelope prompted gently, "or partner in this ranch," Jack finished. "In whatever capacity you'd be comfortable with." Penelope considered his words, the sincerity behind them. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like to stay, but I need time, Jack, to heal. To be certain of my own mind." Jack nodded, relief and understanding mingling in his expression. "Time we've got plenty of, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, this ranch could use a woman's touch again." He squeezed her hand. "It could use your touch, Penelope." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard, Penelope leaned her head against Jack's shoulder. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she felt something like peace settle over her. Whatever came next, she would face it not alone, but with this good man at her side. The following weeks brought significant changes to Redemption Creek. Samuel Blackwell and his surviving gang members were tried and sentenced to hang, though Samuel ultimately received a prison sentence due to his youth and what some considered the mitigating factor of his brother's influence. Marshal Shelton was removed from office after evidence emerged of his collusion with the outlaws. Judge Porter appointed a former Army captain named Harrison as the new marshal, a stern but fair man who promptly began cleaning up the town. For Penelope, the end of the Blackwell threat meant freedom to venture beyond the ranch. Jack took her into town for the first time since her rescue, staying close by her side as they visited the general store, the post office, and finally, the schoolhouse. The school board, eager to make amends for Wilson's behavior, practically begged Penelope to accept the teaching position. The small whitewashed building had stood empty for months, the children of Redemption Creek going without education. "We can offer you $15 a month," the board chairman said anxiously. "And there's the teacher's cottage behind the school. It's small but comfortable." Penelope glanced at Jack, who had maintained a respectful silence throughout the meeting. His expression gave nothing away, but she knew him well enough now to read the slight tension in his shoulders. "The position interests me greatly," she told the chairman, "but I would need to consider the details carefully, particularly the housing arrangement." On the ride back to the ranch, Jack finally spoke about it. "You'd be good for those children. They need someone like you." Penelope studied his profile. "But you don't want me to take the cottage." A faint smile touched his lips. "That obvious, am I?" "Only to me," she assured him. "Jack, I don't have to live in town to teach. Many teachers commute to their schools." Hope flickered in his eyes. "It's a fair ride each way." "A ride I would gladly make," Penelope said, "if it meant coming home to the ranch each day." Jack rained thunder to a halt in the middle of the trail. "Home? You consider the ranch your home now, Penelope felt her cheeks warm. I do, if that's not presumptuous. Jack's smile spread slowly, transforming his weathered face. Penelope Matthews, nothing would make me happier than for you to call my ranch your home. 2 days later, Penelope accepted the teaching position, but declined the cottage. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows in town, but Judge Porter's public approval of Penelope's character silenced most gossip. Her first day of school was scheduled for the following Monday, giving her time to prepare lessons and organize the neglected classroom. Jack threw himself into preparing for her new role with characteristic thoroughness. He and Hank built her a proper desk from pine boards, sanding it smooth as silk. Rosa sewed curtains for the schoolhouse windows from cheerful yellow fabric ordered from Denver. Even Anders and Patrick contributed, crafting a sign for the front of the building that read Redemption Creek School in carefully painted letters. The night before her first day of teaching, Jack presented Penelope with one final gift, a handsome leather satchel filled with new chalk, primers, and a brass bell for calling students to order. Jack, it's too much, she protested, though her fingers caressed the soft leather appreciatively. Nothing's too much for Redemption Creek's finest teacher, he replied with a shy smile. Then, more seriously, I'm proud of you, Penelope. Taking on these children after everything that's happened shows real courage. Penelope set the satchel aside and took his hands in hers. Over the past weeks, they had grown increasingly comfortable with such small touches, hands held, shoulders brushing, the occasional embrace when emotions ran high. But they had not moved beyond these gestures, both mindful of Penelope's need for time to heal. Your faith in me has made all the difference, she told him. I don't know if I could have found the strength without you. Jack's eyes softened. You've always had the strength. I just reminded you it was there. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Jack cleared his throat and stepped back slightly. You should get some rest. Big day tomorrow. Penelope nodded, though part of her wished he hadn't pulled away. Good night, Jack. Good night, Penelope. You're going to be wonderful. Her first day as a teacher proved both exhausting and exhilarating. 23 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age filled the small schoolhouse, their faces curious and somewhat wary of this new teacher from the East. By day's end, Penelope had assessed their widely varying levels of education, established basic rules for behavior, and begun to learn their names and personalities. When Jack arrived to escort her home, she practically bubbled over with stories about her students, bright little Sarah Miller, who had already read through the primer, stoic William Jenkins, who had never attended school before but showed a remarkable aptitude for numbers, the Thompson twins who finished each other's sentences. Jack listened with evident pleasure as they rode, thunder carrying them steadily toward the ranch as the afternoon shadows lengthened. You found your calling, he observed when she finally paused for breath. Those children are lucky to have you, Penelope laughed. Ask me again in a month when the novelty has worn off and they're testing my patience daily. A month from now, you'll still love it, Jack predicted, and they'll still be lucky. As autumn progressed, Penelope fell into a comfortable routine. Weekdays were spent at the schoolhouse, evenings and weekends at the ranch. She found unexpected joy in the dual aspects of her life, the intellectual stimulation of teaching balanced by the practical work of ranch living. Jack had begun including her in some of the ranch business, explaining cattle prices and breeding strategies, showing her how to keep the account books properly. In case anything ever happens to me, he said when she questioned the necessity. Don't talk that way, Penelope scolded. Nothing's going to happen to you. Jack's expression turned serious. Out here, you never know. I want to make sure you'd be taken care of. The implication that he considered her future tied to his wasn't lost on Penelope, but neither of them addressed it directly. Their relationship continued to deepen through shared work and conversation, yet remained in that undefined territory between friendship and courtship. It was Rosa who finally broached the subject one Sunday afternoon as they prepared dinner together. When will you and Jack stop dancing around each other? The older woman asked bluntly, chopping carrots with efficient strokes. Penelope nearly dropped the bowl she was holding. I don't know what you mean. Rosa fixed her with a knowing look. You love him, no, and he loves you. Everyone can see it but the two of you. It's complicated, Penelope murmured, heat rising in her cheeks. Bah, only because you make it so. Rosa set down her knife and turned to face Penelope fully. Life is short, especially out here. If you find love, you grab it with both hands. Later that evening, Penelope found herself alone with Jack on the porch. The night was cool, the first hint of winter in the air as October drew to a close. Jack had draped a blanket around her shoulders without comment, his hand lingering briefly before he took his customary seat beside her. Winter comes early up here, he observed, looking out at the star-filled sky. First snow usually hits before Thanksgiving. I've never seen a proper snowfall, Penelope admitted. In Boston, it was mostly slush and soot by the time it reached the ground. Jack smiled. Then you're in for a treat. There's nothing like a Rocky Mountain snowfall, clean and white as far as you can see, making everything new again. I look forward to it, Penelope said, then hesitated. Jack, may I ask you something? He turned to face her, expression open. Anything. Are you happy with how things are between us? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He considered it carefully before answering. I'm happier than I've been in years having you here, but if you're asking if I want more. He paused, choosing his words. Yes, Penelope, I want more. But only when you're ready, if you're ever ready. The simple honesty of his answer touched her deeply. What if I told you I think I am ready? For more, I mean. Jack went very still, his eyes searching hers in the dim light from the window. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Penelope gathered her courage. I'm saying that I love you, Jackson Reed. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you treat everyone with respect. I love watching you with the horses and how you read Shakespeare now even though you pretend it's just to humor me. She took a shaky breath. And I'm saying that I don't want to waste any more time pretending I don't. For a heartbeat, Jack didn't move. Then slowly, reverently, he reached out to cup her cheek in his calloused palm. Penelope Matthews, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I have loved you since the day you read that sonnet to me in the garden, maybe even before that. I just never dared hope you might feel the same. She turned her face into his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. Well, I do. Jack leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. May I? In answer, Penelope closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tender with newfound confession, then deepened as years of loneliness and months of longing found release. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Marry me, Jack whispered against her lips. Be my wife, Penelope. Share my name and my ranch, not because you need protection or a place to stay, but because we belong together. Tears of joy spilled down Penelope's cheeks. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you, Jack. Their engagement announcement caused a minor sensation in Redemption Creek. While most townspeople approved the dashing rancher, and the pretty schoolteacher made a romantic story, everyone could appreciate a few questioned the propriety of Penelope continuing to live at the ranch before the wedding. Let them talk, Jack said dismissively when Penelope mentioned the gossip. We know the truth of things. Judge Porter silenced the worst of the rumors by offering to host the wedding at his own home, lending his considerable social standing to the proceedings. The date was set for December 20th, allowing time for Penelope's aunt in St. Louis, her only living relative, to travel for the ceremony. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Penelope continued teaching, unwilling to abandon her students even temporarily, while simultaneously planning the celebration with Rosa's help. Jack expanded the ranch house, adding a proper study for Penelope and enlarging the master bedroom. They would live in the main house, while Rosa and Hank would take over the smaller cabin that had been Jack's since his brother's death. Are you certain about the timing? Penelope asked one evening as they reviewed the guest list. Winter will make travel difficult for some of these people. Jack smiled, the private smile he reserved only for her. The timing is perfect. We'll have our wedding, then the Christmas holidays, then 2 months of being snowed in together before spring cattle work begins. His eyes twinkled. I can't think of a better start to married life. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. the promised snow having arrived a week earlier to blanket the landscape in pristine white. Penelope stood at the window of Judge Porter's guest room, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and rose. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of Mrs. Porter and Penelope's Aunt Margaret, who had arrived by train 3 days prior. "Oh, my dear," Aunt Margaret exclaimed, her eyes filling with tears. "You look absolutely radiant." Penelope smoothed the skirt of her wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk that Mrs. Porter had generously offered, having preserved her own daughter's gown. "I feel radiant," she admitted, "and terrified and overjoyed." Mrs. Porter laughed kindly. "All perfectly normal, my dear." "I felt the same on my wedding day." As the women helped with final preparations, arranging Penelope's hair, attaching the short veil, pinning the small bouquet of hothouse roses that Jack had somehow procured from Denver, Penelope's thoughts drifted to how far she had come since that terrible day in the barn. From the depths of despair to this pinnacle of happiness, a journey she could never have imagined when she first stepped off the train in Redemption Creek. Downstairs, the judge's parlor had been transformed for the ceremony. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorated the room, their fresh scent mingling with beeswax candles. Though the guest list was small Jack's ranch hands, Penelope's students and their parents, a few townspeople who had become friends, the room was full to bursting with well-wishers. Judge Porter himself would perform the ceremony, having obtained special permission due to the lack of a minister in Redemption Creek. He waited now at the front of the room with Jack, who looked uncharacteristically nervous in his new suit. When Penelope appeared at the top of the stairs on Hank's arm, the older man, having proudly accepted the role of giving the bride away, a hush fell over the gathering. Jack turned, and the expression that crossed his face at the sight of her was one Penelope knew she would remember until her dying day. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Penelope was only vaguely aware of the judge's words, focusing instead on Jack's hands holding hers, the steady blue of his eyes, the slight tremor in his voice as he repeated his vows. When at last the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was joyous and boisterous. Patrick played the fiddle while Anders surprised everyone with his skill on the harmonica. Children darted between the adults, high on cake and excitement. Judge Porter made a touching toast to the couple, speaking of new beginnings and second chances. As the winter afternoon waned toward evening, Jack found Penelope by the window, watching the first flakes of a new snowfall drift down. "Mrs. Reed," he said softly, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "How does it feel?" Penelope leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Wonderful, perfect." She turned in his embrace to face him. "I never thought I could be this happy, Jack." "Especially not after." "SHH," he soothed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That's behind us now, we have our whole lives ahead." "Our whole lives," she repeated, the words sweet on her tongue. "I like the sound of that." Later, as they rode home through the gently falling snow, the ranch house came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light. Rosa and Hank had gone ahead to prepare the house, then tactfully retired to their cabin, leaving the newlyweds to their privacy. Jack lifted Penelope from the saddle with reverent hands, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, a fire blazed in the hearth, and the table was set with the good china and a bottle of champagne, another of Jack's mysterious Denver acquisitions. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," he said, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. Penelope touched his face, still marveling that this good man was now her husband. "I've been home since the day you found me, Jack. I just didn't know it yet." The spring of 1879 brought new beginnings to the Reed Ranch. Cattle prices were strong, and Jack's careful breeding program was beginning to show results in the quality of his stock. Penelope continued teaching, though she had taken on an assistant, a bright young woman named Clara, who had graduated from Penelope's class the previous year, and showed a gift for working with the youngest children. The ranch itself was flourishing under the care of its expanded family. Rosa's garden had doubled in size, now including a section of vegetables destined for Penelope's new project, a hot lunch program for the schoolchildren. Hank had taken 2 new cowboys under his wing, teaching them the Reed way of handling cattle. Even Thunder seemed rejuvenated, prancing like a colt whenever Jack saddled him for the ride into town to fetch Penelope from school. But the most significant change was the one growing within Penelope herself. By April, there was no denying the gentle swell of her belly beneath her dresses. "A baby," Jack had whispered in wonder when she told him, his hand covering hers over the barely perceptible bump. "Our baby." The news had spread quickly through the ranch and town, bringing a flood of well wishes and advice. Rosa immediately began knitting tiny garments, while Hank set to work crafting a cradle from aspen wood. Even Judge Porter got involved, sending a package of books on infant care from his own library in Denver. Now, on a warm June evening, Penelope sat in the garden that had become her sanctuary, a book open but unread in her lap as she gazed out over the land that had become so dear to her. The setting sun cast long shadows across the pastures, where cattle grazed contentedly under the watchful eyes of the ranch hands. Jack found her there, as he often did at this hour. He settled beside her on the bench he had built the previous autumn, his arm automatically going around her shoulders. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said, using the endearment he had taken to calling her in private. Penelope smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking about how much has changed in a year. Last June, I was still in Boston, dreaming of adventure in the West but terrified to actually leave." She placed her hand over her growing belly. "I could never have imagined this life." Jack covered her hand with his own. "Regrets?" "Not one," she assured him. "Every step of the journey, even the darkest parts, led me here, to you, to our child, to this land." She gestured toward the ranch stretching out before them. "I wouldn't change a moment of it." Jack kissed her temple, his breath warm against her skin. "Nor would I. Though I would have spared you the suffering if I could have." "I know." Penelope turned to face him fully. "But don't you see, if not for that terrible day in the barn, we might never have met. I might have taken the teaching position and lived in town, nodding politely when the taciturn rancher rode through on business." "I'd like to think I would have found you anyway," Jack said with a small smile. "Some things are meant to be, Penny." As darkness fell, and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, they remained in the garden, talking quietly of plans for the future: the nursery to be finished, the cattle to be driven to market in the fall, the possibility of expanding the school to include advanced studies for the older children. When at last they rose to go inside, Jack paused at the garden gate, drawing Penelope into his arms for a lingering kiss. "Thank you," he murmured against her lips. "For what?" she asked, her hands resting on his chest. "For giving my name and my ranch meaning again," Jack said simply. "For making them part of something worth building." Penelope smiled up at her husband, this man who had rescued her in more ways than he would ever know. "The pleasure," she assured him, "has been entirely mine." As they walked hand in hand toward the welcoming lights of their home, Penelope felt the gentle movement of their child within her, another life to add to the legacy they were creating together. From the darkest moment of her life had come this boundless joy, this love that grew stronger with each passing day. The girl who had been left in a barn with a sack on her head had found not just safety but belonging, not just shelter but home, not just a protector but a partner. And in the years to come, the Reed Ranch would stand as testament to what can grow when two people find each other against all odds and choose, day after day, to build something beautiful together.